Hey there, friends. My name is Jonathan Page. I'm the Director of Connectional Ministries for Innovation and Creativity, and I want to welcome you to another edition of General Conference theme videos on the road. Today, I am here with my friend Grace Hahn, and we're going to be talking about regionalization, which is one of the most important themes that is facing the 2024 General Conference that's happening April 23rd through May 3rd in Charlotte, North Carolina. This is the global gathering of United Methodists to come together and decide kind of where our priorities are, how we want to live in community together. And today we're going to talk about why regionalization is a big part of that. So Grace, thanks so much for taking some time to hang out with us today.
I'm happy to be here.
Would you just share with folks that are watching a little bit about yourself, kind of what's your role in the conference and what's your role on our General Conference delegation?
Sure. Like Jonathan Page said, my name is Grace Hahn. I am the pastor at Trinity United Methodist Church in Alexandria, Virginia, in the Northern Virginia district. I'm also one of our conference's General Conference delegates. I'm very excited about that. And one of the roles that I've served on General Conference is to help organize us a little bit around regionalization. So I've been leading our subcommittee on regionalization on behalf of our delegation.
That's great. You've been doing a great job. And so I think one of the things that I would be interested in, I think many watching this video would be interested in, is just first, what is regionalization? And why would 2024 be an appropriate time to be talking about this topic?
Yeah. So regionalization refers to a set of legislation that is looking at restructuring our denomination. So if we take just a little bit step back, our denomination's demographics have been changing for quite a long time. We are a much more global church than we were 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. So as an example, in 1980, our General Conference membership, the membership of the United Methodist Church, about 93% of that came from the US and 7% came from outside the US. In 2020, about 44% of our delegation came from outside the US. That shows a significant shift in the way the denomination and our church as a whole has changed over the last few decades. But our structure hasn't quite kind of caught up to that. Sometimes the analogy I like to use is, at a church I used to serve, we had two basements that didn't connect to each other just because of the way the church was built. One side was the old part of the church and the basement was built then, and the new part of the church, the basement, they had built the basement, but they didn't connect. And some of that is just a function of how the denomination and the church has grown over time. But it might be a chance and an opportunity for us to revisit how the denomination is structured, and in particular to make sure that the way that our church is structured gives voice and gives vote to equity around the world.
Yeah, I think that's really, really important, especially as we imagine what the future of the church looks like. That's especially meaningful. And so, Grace, one of the things that folks may or may not be aware of is that regionalization, big ticket theme, but there are a number of different proposals that are being brought forth around regionalization. Just kind of thinking from a broad scale view, can you talk a little bit about some of the what distinguishes those proposals and kind of what the maybe implications of those proposals might be?
Yeah, like you said, there's a number of different regionalization legislations. I do think they kind of build off of each other. That's important to remember. So the big one that we may have heard about before is called the Christmas Covenant. So following General Conference 2019, a number of delegates from our central conferences are conferences outside of the United States, came together to say, how can we stay united in mission as a denomination and find a way to move forward? And so they proposed what's called the Christmas Covenant, and it looked at a way to restructure the church in a way that gave some contextual ability to each of our regions, but that as a church as a whole, we could stay united. Following the Christmas Covenant, there was also a proposal put out by the Connectional Table that looked at creating our own U.S. regional conference. There's also been legislation put out by the Standing Committee on Central Conference Matters that kind of builds upon that. I think what's important to know is that they're all kind of building off of each other around this idea of regionalization.
I think that's important too. And so all of these proposals, I think if I'm correct, involve constitutional amendments. Mm-hmm. And so a constitutional amendment is a little bit different from a regular piece of legislation that might pass at General Conference because of some of the standards that come with it. I wonder if you would talk with folks that, let's say something does pass around regionalization at General Conference. What does that process look like both at General Conference and then after General Conference? Because of that kind of the constitutional amendment that it is.
So before I answer that, let me just talk a little bit about how the denomination is structured.
Great.
That kind of gets into why there's constitutional amendments. So like I said, because when the denomination was founded, we were a very US-based denomination. The way the denomination is structured right now is we have 5 jurisdictional conferences, which are within the United States, and then we have 7 central conferences, which are outside of the United States. Now, when it was started, central conferences were kind of seen as missional conferences, right? It also meant that within central conferences, there was space in central conferences to contextualize or adapt parts of the Book of Discipline for their own missional context. So as an example, in the Davos area in the Philippines, there is some space to adapt ordination requirements because for a lot of that area, there aren't established seminaries in the same way that there may be in the US. So that part of the discipline needed to be adapted slightly for their missional context. To equip people to be ready for ministry, they needed to have some flexibility to adapt portions of the Book of Discipline to be able to meet their mission. Now in the US, anything that happens at our jurisdictional conferences have to go to General Conference before they're approved. And at the time when it started, it made sense because we were a primarily US-based denomination. That no longer makes sense. We are a global church. And what regionalization would mean is it creates, I think the goal is to create 4 regions, the US, Africa, Philippines, and Europe. And each of those regions would have some flexibility to adapt portions of the Book of Discipline, not the entire thing, just section 6 of our Book of Discipline, it talks about ordering the church, to adapt it to meet our contextual settings while being united as an entire global church in our mission and ministry together. That does require a constitutional amendment in our Book of Discipline so that we would restructure the church. Now, a constitution amendment has a higher threshold to pass. To pass a constitutional amendment, and the reason is because the Constitution is kind of what holds us together. That's kind of the basic structure. So it makes sense that there will be a higher threshold to make any changes within the Constitution. To pass a constitutional amendment, you have to pass it by a 2/3 majority at General Conference. And then that legislation is going to come back to every single annual conference around the globe. Everyone's going to vote, and then it has to pass by a 2/3 aggregate vote across. So it's not just 2/3 in Virginia Conference. It's like they take all the votes who voted yes in Virginia and then tabulate that with all the yeses around the world. It has to pass by a 2/3 majority. Our anticipation as a delegation is that this is going to be a major issue at General Conference this year. And if it does pass, it will come back to the Virginia Annual Conference in June. And this will be before us as an annual conference. And that we would have to vote as an annual conference about how we wanted to move forward on regionalization, which is one of the reasons why we wanted to make sure that our conference was well-educated, had the right information, because facts are our friends, so we know how best to move forward and that we can vote with our conscience in the best way that might provide a pathway forward for our denomination and our church.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Grace. And it illustrates why this is such an important theme for us to be aware of now, leading up to General Conference, because it's not only impacting the work of General Conference, but it likely has the potential of impacting our work at Annual Conference this June in Hampton, and we'll be looking forward to that as well. Grace, this has been really, really helpful. Do you have a last word for folks about either regionalization or just your perspective on General Conference as a whole?
So if I could just take a moment of personal privilege. I do feel like regionalization is the best way for us to find a way forward towards being both an inclusive church and a global church. 2 things which I think are so important for us in the future of United Methodism and in the church. So I just want to share that. I think God calls us to be united as a church, and I strive for that. That's one of my hopes as a church. And I hope we can do that in both an inclusive and in a global way.
Amen. Amen. Well, if you want to find out more about regionalization, I encourage you to visit our conference website, vaumc.org. You can go to the content page for General Conference, where we've got all of these theme videos as well as supplemental information about regionalization and many of the other themes that we're talking about in these videos. Grace, I want to thank you for your time and your instructive leadership on this conversation, and I want to thank you for tuning in today. I hope you have a great day, and we'll look forward to seeing you real soon. Take care.